4th, 2022 City Council meeting. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format, which enables the City Council to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed for this meeting on the city's public webcast and meeting materials webpage. Tonight's meeting will include a public forum. If you wish to participate and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer or other device, click once on the hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. We will continue accepting raised hands until 7:35. The meeting moderator will disallow any requests to speak that are made after that deadline. You will have 2.5 minutes to speak. As a reminder, speakers have the option of turning on your video when you are called on to speak. As your turn is announced, the meeting moderator will temporarily promote you to panelist status, and you can unmute and turn on your video if you wish. And please use this responsibly. Our intent is simply to be able to see each other's faces as testimony is given. And finally, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for your willingness to stay with this virtual format. As always, feel free to contact any one of us individually or together via email or voicemail if there is testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different manner. And now we'll formally open the meeting with a land acknowledgement. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as the Kalapuya Ilahi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We acknowledge the inherent political sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribal nations in the state of Oregon and all American Indian Alaska Native people who live here. And with that, we are ready for our first agenda item, which is committee reports and items of interest. Are there councilors who have things to share? So Councilor Saret.
Thank you, Mayor. So first, I'll give a quick report from the IGR, the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. So there was a switch out of membership, and Councilor Groves has now joined that body, with Councilor Keating being assigned to some other committee. I don't know what. And the committee was kind enough to elect me as chair for another year. So I am the chair of the committee. And in the last month or so, maybe 2 months, first Ethan and I, as chair and staff, worked on a draft process to respond to the motion that council passed when we gave our last IGR update and had that discussion. And then we presented that to the committee at our last meeting and refined it a little bit. And I believe Ethan is planning to send that process out to you all so you know what our plan is in terms of our process and a process for councilors to get items given attention at an IGR meeting. So I just wanted to share that. And then secondly, I wanted to thank the Register Guard for publishing a guest op-ed that Councilor Ye and I collaborated on together, trying in an attempt to shed some light on how the city is approaching the implementation of House Bill 2001. So appreciated that it was published, and have received some positive feedback from folks in the community since then. And then I also appreciated in the same edition, so this was the Sunday edition, in their letters to the editor, they published a letter from a gentleman who is published fairly frequently, who was casting some doubt on various aspects of COVID response and the vaccines. And the editor took the time to put a little editor's note encouraging folks that if they visited this particular website that was recommended, that they also read the CDC disclaimer on the website. So you don't always see editors taking the time to do that kind of thing, and I appreciated it and wanted to call it out. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Keating, and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Servette, I'm serving on the Human Rights Commission now. And I'm proud to serve on human rights, LRAPA, and alongside you on the Human Services Commission. The Human Rights Commission met last week and received a report from EPD on bias and hate crimes. I'm alarmed to learn that about half of the bias and hate crimes go unreported. But I'm encouraged to learn the outreach to largely affected communities. The work continues, and EPD reports, and I'd love to hear more from Chief Skinner when appropriate, some creative outreach avenues to encourage folks who are victims of bias and hate crime to come forward. LRAPA met today. We advanced a parity resolution supported by a vast majority of LRAPA's 18 employees to move toward a PERS retirement system, and received a phenomenal report about Oak Ridge air quality. And there's a longing, hopefully in this calendar year when the pandemic's in the rearview mirror, to do an LRAPA roadshow around the county. And I would hope that Oak Ridge would be first on the list to visit and see the work that's happening in Oak Ridge in person. And today we met, the Human Services Commission met and just had a robust discussion and received a report on ARPA funds and ARPA allocations, youth homeless demonstration grant. And the conversation revolved around increased community and interagency service provider collaboration to support the critical operations of our very own safe sleep sites. That's my report, Mayor. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to report that Councillor Ye and I had the opportunity to attend the Northeast Neighbors meeting this last Thursday night, where there was a lively discussion with the representatives from ODOT and some of our state senators, state representatives about the nature of the work that's been done so far at Delta and Beltline, and the nature of what remains, and the necessary funding, and the role that council will and can play to make sure that we do more to make that intersection safe. And we briefly touched on the status of upgrading Gillum Road from Ayers North, which has been a long-standing interjurisdictional issue between the county and the city, and affects the safety of an awful lot of folks in North Eugene. I suspect that during budget, you may be hearing more from me on that. The jurisdictions involved are working much more closely together these days to solve some of those problems, but we may need to step up and do a little more. And also to report then that we have a meeting of the Cal Young Neighborhood Association this next Thursday night at 7. And if anyone cannot find online how to link up with the Zoom meeting that lives in the Cal Young neighborhood, just send me an email. I'll make sure you have it. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other councilors with comments? Councilor Zelenka.
Thank you, Mayor. I met with some folks from SUNA about their concerns about HB 2001 and how it's being implemented and its impacts on residential neighborhoods, and encourage them to look at ways to modify the matrix that we had about minimal encourage, incentivize, and to see which ones of those encourage they thought we should move back to minimal. Secondly, Councilor Ye and I were on the police commission meeting last week. And one of the things that we did as a commission is we heard from and talked to the folks that do our 911 call center, which was really a fascinating presentation and process they go through. And one of the things that we talked about was the call priorities that they use to respond to the calls. And just as a matter of information, the priority 1 calls are emergencies in progress where there's an immediate threat to life or physical injury or significant property damage in process. Priority 2 is a crime in progress that requires immediate response to the threat of physical injury or property damage, and the suspect or the victim are both present. We got priority 3, calls crime is in progress, but no threat to life or property or damage. Call 4, calls that don't require an immediate response and don't contain suspect information, and the victim is present on the scene and available. And priority 5, which is requests for services for fact-finding, reporting, and rendering assistance. And that's kind of the priority order that the call takers take in order to route calls and have our first responders, police, and fire and respond to these calls. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and a couple of people talked about going and visiting, which I haven't done, but 5-6 screens of things going on, and the training they have to go through to keep calm and work people through the processes. And when, of course, when people call 911, they're probably a little panicked and have a lot of adrenaline, and these people just do an amazing job. And how they're trying to separate, for COVID reasons, the different cubicles when it's difficult to do because you need to communicate with everybody around you, because the 911 room has the fire and the police people in there as well. So it's just a well-run process that we have, and it serves most of Wayne County. And I thought it was really interesting to talk to them and get reaffirmed that we really do have a top-notch folks there, although they, like everybody else, are being really pressured by COVID and filling positions and keeping people on staff, as are our folks in hospitals. So it's just going around everywhere. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? I have a little list, and I'll try and be succinct with it. I will just mention that that after the shootings at Wow Hall on Friday the 14th, that I attended the board meeting for Wow Hall the following, I think it was Wednesday night, and I just want to say a couple of things, which is that as you might expect at Wow Hall, they were both heartbroken and determined in their resilience, and determined to turn to healing first within their own sort of Wow Hall community, and then looking outward to the broader community about how we respond to violence, about how we create a community in which everyone is safe. And so they were grateful for the community outpouring, and they're also committed to really addressing the trauma and the long-term healing of that very horrifying event impacted so many people. So that was a powerful meeting. And in between the shooting and my attending that meeting, I attended the MLK Day dedication of a memorial to Andrea Ortiz at the new Andrea Ortiz Park. And so there's a beautiful memorial there, and there was a huge number of volunteers. I mean, probably 80 volunteers that showed up that day to plant 60 trees in the periphery of the park. They're planting the trees around the edges, and then ultimately the park will be developed interior to that. But as you all know, this is a part of town that doesn't have enough tree coverage, and this is a wonderful new park. And it was inspiring, and I think a ray of hope in the face of just having had this shooting. And so very powerful coming together. And Councillor Syrett and Councillor Evans and I all attended the Active Bethel Citizens meeting later in the week. And again, this sort of powerful coming together of that neighborhood association to talk about how they envision their community and also how they address the findings of dioxin in their neighborhood and the impact of J.H. Baxter. So a lot of really strong community action. And then just a couple of other quick things. In my regular role attending the Poverty and Homelessness Board, they are looking at their strategic plan, and I have agreed to work on an ad hoc committee because we want to make sure that that strategic plan of the Poverty and Homelessness Board kind of incorporates and aligns with the work we're doing on the HIP, on the HIP, on the Housing Implementation Plan, that those two things work together and that we have the mutual goals and the numbers are the same, the metrics are the same in each one. So there's a sort of convergence of that work from the Poverty and Homelessness Board and the work that we're doing separately as a city. And I'm happy to be part of that process. And relative to our conversation in the 5:30 meeting and the Housing Implementation Plan, I also sit on the mayors and CEOs for U.S. Housing Investment. I zoomed into their meeting in Washington on Friday, and I have joined them in signing a letter to the Congressional Reconciliation process to keep $150 billion in support for housing in particular in whatever happens after the Build Back Better, but to keep that $150 billion and making the case that it's critically important to us. And they're highlighting, specifically, we highlighted in that letter, housing vouchers, and we highlighted the low-income housing tax credits and the need to expand those. So that work is all happening on that larger landscape to support that you all are doing right here in Eugene. So that's my update. And I see that Councillor Keating has another comment.
Ever so briefly, Mayor, I wanted to thank you for bringing up the shooting. I wanted to commend you for your pitch perfect extemporaneous speech you gave at the Andrea Ortiz Memorial Park dedication, weaving in the late councilor's priorities and vision, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision, and the need for community healing coming on the heels of the shooting. It was A+, and thank you, Mayor, for your words. I have seen online, some of us are a little more active in social media than others, and I've seen some responses to the shooting revolve around the genre, the musical genre, unfortunately. Blaming the genre. I just want to go on record, Mayor, as saying that it's not only unfortunate, it's unfair, and it's uncalled for to blame any genre of music or where the musicians are from. I blame unnecessarily armed idiots with guns who bring harm to others. That sort of tragedy, it's not only stupid and asinine, it's sadly pervasive across the country, and it must stop. So, Mayor, thank you for bringing up the shooting. Thank you for partnering with Wow Hall, and thank you, colleagues, for your attention to the matter. And we dodged a bullet. We were rather fortunate that no one perished. We got lucky, and let's make sure it doesn't happen again in our community. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much for those comments. And with that, we can turn to the next item, which is our consent calendar. So, Councillor Syrett?
I move to approve the items on consent calendar 1.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That passes 6-0. Thank you very much. And now we are ready to move on to the public forum. The public forum is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the City Council on any city-related issues, except for those items which have already been heard by a hearings official. When it is your turn, the moderator will announce your name and promote you to panelist status. Please state your name clearly and for Eugene residents, your ward if known, before beginning your comments. Again, each person will have 2.5 minutes to speak. If you're watching the meeting, the timer should be visible. A yellow light will come on when you have 15 seconds to complete your comments. The red light indicates the end of the 2.5 minutes. For those who have connected to the meeting via phone and don't have the benefit of seeing the timer, please be aware that your microphone will be muted at the 2.5 minute mark. I have noticed that there is a long list of people signed up to speak, 33 people. So we should be able to squeeze that in. It's just a reminder that the public forum is limited to 90 minutes. And so I would just encourage those of you who can be succinct and use less than your allotted 2.5 minutes, you will make it more possible for everyone to have a chance to address us. So thank you all for taking the time to show up and to speak to City Council. And with that, I will turn it over to Naya, who is moderating the forum.
Thank you, Mayor. So like Mayor said, we have a long list and I am sharing my screen so you guys can see where you are in line. And I'll just briefly go down the list. And we are going to start with Heather Merrick. She is representing the Human Rights Commission, followed by Elliot Farron. Heather, please unmute.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Heather Merrick and I reside in Ward 1. And as said, I'm here on behalf of the Human Rights Commission this evening. 2 weeks ago, the city announced a plan to close the 13th and Chambers encampment. Eligible unhoused residents could relocate to Dawn, a program operated by St. Vincent de Paul. The city declined to say where the remaining individuals who would also be evicted could go. Through our poverty and homelessness work group, the Human Rights Commission received input from service providers and those with lived experience, among others. Significant concerns were raised. One, many people would not qualify for a Dawn space. Only those who lived at 13th and Chambers more than 6 months would. Some people are banned from St. Vinny's. Some people have pets, which Dawn disallows, and tearing people from their pets is not trauma informed. Some have experienced past victimization or trauma at Dawn. Some feel unsafe there. Some have disabilities and conditions which prevent them from living in that setting. Some are at heightened risk of serious illness if exposed to COVID, which is far more likely in a congregate shelter, especially during a surge. Some receive crucial services at encampments, which displacement would disrupt. Some are wary of being corralled and warehoused away by the government. Finally, it is unclear where else people could go, and finding people for failing to move perpetuates the poverty cycle. Thus, the Human Rights Commission voted to send you the following statement. We commend the city for facilitating additional options for community members experiencing homelessness, especially during the winter. However, we ask that the city not evict those who remain in place. Pursuant to Martin v. Boise, the United Nations Convention Against Torture, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it violates constitutional and human rights to evict and penalize an unsheltered person from an encampment when shelter accessible and appropriate to that individual is unavailable. When individual housing is not an option, such evictions also are contrary to CDC and OHA public health guidance. Although many people may benefit from the St. Vincent de Paul site, it offers no individual housing and it will not be accessible or appropriate for many due to a variety of reasons. Until safe alternatives are available to all, it is more humane to allow people to remain where they are and where they can continue to receive necessary services. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Next was going to be Elliot Farron. We are having an issue moving him over, so we're going to go to Zakarian and then Elliot Farron. Scott, please unmute when you're ready.
Good evening. My name is Scott Zakarian. I live in Ward 7. I'm also a property manager here in Eugene. We manage rental properties throughout Eugene, Springfield, Junction City, Veneta, and Cresswell. I wanted to speak tonight about the proposed renter protection ordinances. Specifically, I'm concerned about the unintended consequences that ordinances would have both on applicants and renters when individual cities begin imposing different sets of rules. While supporting renters is important and we strive to always act in good faith and treat our applicants and residents with courtesy and respect, local ordinances are not the way to accomplish the goal of providing additional consumer protections for renters. If all 5 cities that we manage properties in were to pass separate local regulations, the work to ensure that we maintain compliance with all applicable ordinances would increase to the point where we would need to hire additional staff to ensure that we're compliant in all cases. Those costs aren't something that we can, as a company, can easily absorb, and that cost would ultimately end up having to be passed on to our property owners in the form of increased fees. For most of our property owners, those costs are also not easily absorbed and would eventually end up having to be passed on to renters in the form of increased rents. The goal of protecting renters is an important one. However, local ordinances are not the way to accomplish this. Any renters protections should be implemented in a thoughtful, data-driven manner at the state level, not the local level. This approach would give us the best opportunity to create a system that is equitable with fewer unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Next is Elliot Farron, followed by Laura Jacobson.
Good evening. My name is Elliot Farron. I live in Ward 2. I'm an attorney at the Oregon Law Center. I grew up in Eugene and I've been practicing law here for 6 years. I'm here tonight to urge you to pass the Protecting Eugene Renters in Transition recommendations of the Housing Policy Board, including displacement prevention assistance. Displacement prevention assistance, or DPA, is a needed tenant protection. Because the housing market here in Eugene is so tight, it's very difficult for tenants to find housing quickly when they receive a no-cause notice or are priced out of their current housing. Every week, I talk to tenants who are unable to find new housing due to high move-in costs. DPA can make a difference between getting a new place and homelessness, which can lead to a loss of employment and trap people in poverty. I also want to speak briefly about the security deposit protections recommended by the Housing Policy Board. In my 6 years of practice of landlord-tenant law here in Eugene, I've met with hundreds of tenants who felt they'd been cheated in their security deposit accountings. The problem with the process is that unless someone is willing to sue, which is a big resource cost, landlords have no accountability for the amounts they charge. What ends up happening is that if tenants won't agree to pay the disputed charges, the landlord can report them to collections and mar their credit histories for years. The deposit protection recommended by the Housing Policy Board simply requires landlords to take pictures at move-in and move-out before withholding damages from a tenant's deposit. This will help create a paper trail and empower tenants to demand fair accountings. Please pass the Protecting Eugene Renters in Transition slate, including displacement prevention assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot. Next is Laura Jacobson, followed by Jason Evans.
Are you ready for me? Sorry, it looks like it hasn't started over on the timer.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor Venus and esteemed council members. My name is Laura Jacobson, and I represent 996 apartments here in Eugene. The apartments are located in Ward 4 as well as Ward 6. I have been involved in multifamily for 28 years. So besides being in the service and being a veteran, this is the only job I've ever held in my life. I'm very passionate about this industry, and I've always had a goal of helping other people. Really, this industry is so much more than just handing somebody a key and walking away. That's not what this industry is about. This industry is about building relationships with our residents, helping our residents feel like they're part of a bigger community, and supporting the city that we live in as a whole. I'm opposed to a couple of the items that are with the housing proposals. One of them is banning credit and application screening fees. The reason I'm opposed to this, I wanted to just talk a little bit about our industry as a whole and the business model that we operate from. So if you look at a typical 200 unit apartment community, you're going to have about 50% turnover within a year. And each of those new move-ins is going to have likely 2 to 3 applications. So just at a 2 application per move-in at a 200 unit apartment community, 50% turnover, you're talking $8,400. The owner is not going to be able to easily absorb this, and those costs are going to get reverted back to the renters that live within that community. So you're basically allowing somebody to not pay application fees, but it's going to get charged back to everybody that lives there. So that is a disproportionate burden on the folks that do live within that community. The second concern that I have is about the lowering credit scores to 500. Most of our owners that we represent have lending contracts in place, and this could become a huge issue between the lender and the landlord. And I really question the legality and the enforceability of that. And I think that's something the city needs to look at. Lastly, I would recommend that you reach out to the University of Oregon and have an unbiased, neutral survey completed to help you make thoughtful decisions that are going to benefit the city in the long run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Next is Jason Evans, followed by Stephanie Turnbull.
Councilors, thank you for taking the time to listen to me. My name is Jason Evans and I live in Ward 5. I was on the Renter Protection Committee. I'm a principal of a property management company in Eugene, which has clients in each Eugene ward. I've lived in Eugene for almost 30 years and was a registered nurse in local hospitals, as well as a firefighter paramedic in Springfield. I grew up on government assistance, and after working hard for years, I own a few rental properties now in Eugene. My hope is that because of my experience and involvement, I can be of a resource for you as you are considering rental ordinances for the city of Eugene. I'm recommending any governing laws, rules, or ordinances related to the landlord-tenant law stay at the state level. I'm concerned about the implementation of local landlord-tenant ordinances and the effects on the entire market now and in the future. Imagine the confusion if over 200 cities in Oregon each had their own landlord-tenant laws. As of late, due to law changes at the state level, it continues to become more and more complicated to manage rental properties, and this is coming from someone who does this professionally. As such, insurance companies have increased their business insurance by 60% this year. This trend occurred at the same time that Portland implemented their similar ordinances. Example of increased complication. Attorneys have indicated that there were over 25 changes to rental documents in 1 year when there were normally only 1 or 2. These were in response to a multitude of newer Senate bills that related to rent control, end of tenancy notices, screening, etc. These are all tenant protections. So I ask, why are we trying to consider more laws here? Rental agreements are now over 30 pages. Additionally, there are concerns mentioned in the previous city council meetings regarding screening an 18-year-old and 11-month leases. Please note that the property management actions are in response to current laws and to stay compliant with said laws. It requires someone very experienced and knowledgeable about landlord-tenant law to know how it is applied, how it can be changed to avoid issues and contradictions. With that, I strongly recommend that the landlord-tenant law stay at the state level and to consider other alternatives locally. These proposed ordinances will affect the entire market, which is like using a 4-inch paintbrush to paint a Monet. Please keep in mind that tenants and landlords need each other. One cannot exist without each other. Thank you for your time. Contact me if you like.
Thank you, Jason. Next is Stephanie Turnbull, followed by Catherine Dunn.
Hi, my name's Stephanie Turnbull. I live in Ward 2 with my friend Matt Keating. So I've worked for many years on various campaigns, including with Tim, Matt, and Ryan. Tim and Ryan testified last week or last meeting. And I've been working to support working people, social equity and wealth equity for a long, long time, have been members of unions, have worked at the University Health Center and all of that. So I'm totally in touch with the needs of renters. I've been a renter for at least 40 years of my life. And as of this summer, I became a rental owner. My landlord allowed me to buy the duplex I lived in. So now I have a tenant, my neighbor, who's been my neighbor for all of those years. I am concerned about some of these policies because, as both Mr. Zakarian, Ms. Jacobson, and Mr. Evans all brought up, there are many of these that are going to go downhill in terms of being added to the rent cost for tenants. What I think we need is a social economist. Now, don't be alarmed. I didn't say a socialist economist. A social economist is someone who can tease out what all of these laws and policies will end up causing in unintended consequences. And that she can tease out Barbara, I say she, because Barbara Dudley from Portland University is one of the best I know. And she can pull out all of these different strings that are complicated and make unintended and undesirable consequences on tenants and the small property owners like myself, who are kind of being forced out of it. And all of them are being turned over to larger corporations, one of which Ryan mentioned last meeting. And when I moved here 30 years ago, I was told to stay away from that particular business. And as a result, I've always rented from individual landowners. And I've never really had a big problem. And when I have had a problem, we talked about it individually, person to person, as adults. And almost everyone I've talked to in the two rental organizations that I've belonged to, they all want long-term renters, reasonable rates. They don't want them to damage the property, obviously. They want them to be good for the neighborhood and good for each other. And as it stands now, it creates more conflict, more problems for both sides. And it shouldn't be a side to side. It should be worked together to make it work for the community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next is Catherine Dunn, followed by Eric Lundberg.
Good evening, Mayor Venus and councilors. I have a few points I'd like to make about the proposed rental ordinances. I'm Catherine Dunn from Ward 5. Number one, the state of Oregon already has laws in place to govern landlord-tenant relationships. We know it as ORS 90. And the federal government has laws to prevent discrimination, such as the Fair Housing Act. And as Jason and Scott previously mentioned, if each city in Oregon passed its own laws, it would create complexity. And the more complex, the more time and money it would take to manage rentals, and that would result in higher rents. So unless there's a compelling reason why Eugene is unique and needs to create its own laws, it should not, in my opinion. Number two, no verified complaints, facts, or data have been provided to support the need for these ordinances. The ordinances were developed by the Renter Protection Committee, of which 70% are renter advocates and 30% were property managers. Clearly, that was lopsided. The Renter Experience Survey was created by this same committee. The survey was distributed primarily to low-income renters. Thus, the results are not representative of the average renter in Eugene, but of a small minority. The survey itself had some leading questions, and the sample size was small. Out of approximately 360,000 rentals we have here in Eugene, 850 surveys were completed. That's only about 2% of rentals, and that is insignificant. Complaints by renters are not facts. There are two sides to every story, and the only way to verify a complaint is to investigate all parties involved. So let's not consider these ordinances because there is no data to show that there is a widespread problem that needs to be solved. And number three, renters and landlords should be on the same side. We both have the same interest. Renters have an interest in renting, landlords have an interest in renting. Renters want a nice, good place to stay for the long term. Landlords want nice, good, long-term tenants. The average landlord is not the enemy some renter advocates would have you believe. Most of us care about our properties and care about our tenants. I personally enjoy providing families with a beautiful place to call home. In over 25 years, I've never evicted anybody, ever. I've housed families with pets, retired couples have stayed with us, disabled people, people of various races, folks that had prior convictions. I could go on. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Catherine. Next is Eric Lundberg, followed by Amy Kubich.
Thank you, Mayor Venus and members of the council. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Eric Lundberg, and my wife and I are Eugene natives and live in Ward 4. We own rental properties and are developers of Amazon cottages in Southeast Eugene. We live, work, play, and volunteer in this community and fully support genuine efforts of making equity possible for all. The Tenant Protections Ordinance Council is considering now, however, is at best flawed legislation based on flawed research. As we like to say, it's like trying to drive a nail with a wet fish. It's just not going to work. This appears to be almost punitive action against providers of rental housing in Eugene, and that's not equity, no matter how it's dressed up. What we really are concerned about, though, are these unintended consequences of this proposal. It not only does not address the elephant in the room, housing supply, I firmly believe it will exacerbate that very problem, and here's how. Landlords already have myriad rules to learn, apply, and abide by: federal laws, state laws, local laws, credit reporting laws, pandemic laws, and on and on. Adding another layer of time, cost, and risk to rental ownership, which this proposal does, is going to be the breaking point for some property owners. Not all, but some will definitely throw up their hands and say, enough. When the state added additional tenant protections and rent control a few years ago, we promptly sold 2 of our single-family homes and chose to reinvest in Denver, Colorado. If this passes, we will again face the choice of how many of our remaining properties to sell. And when homes like ours do sell, they're gobbled up by owner occupants, which is great unless you're a tenant looking for housing. A quick example, we recently had a rare vacancy at one of our smallest rentals, just 400 square feet at market rent, and it brought in 43 inquiries in the 48 hours it was on the market. These aren't just looky-loos, they all wanted it. There's simply not nearly enough supply available. And I believe choice goes a long ways towards achieving equity. And my final point regards the timing of this proposal. It will have a chilling effect on any new supply. And this is especially troubling now that the city is finalizing building code to comply with the state law regarding middle housing. How many of my neighbors are going to take on this additional risk of building a small, affordable ADU with this added layer? I urge you to reconsider any support for this proposed bill in its current form. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Eric. Next is Amy Kubich, followed by Joanne Shatola.
Hello, Mayor Venus, City Council members. My name is Amy Kubich. I work for Cornerstone Community Housing here in Eugene. And I want to thank you again for your consideration of the conditional home loan forgiveness request for Oakleaf Village tonight. Oakleaf Village has provided 14 affordable apartment homes for low-income families in Santa Clara for the last 20 years, but the property has been struggling financially in recent years. Expenses have been increasing faster than projected due to material and labor cost increases, as well as the need for more maintenance activity as the property ages. Additionally, rental income has not gone up as much as expected because rent limits for affordable housing are tied to the area median income, and area median income has increased slower than projected. For example, following the Great Recession, there were 5 straight years in which affordable housing rent limits did not increase at all because incomes across the county had decreased. This is why we are asking for support from the city to offer conditional forgiveness of the property's remaining home loan balance. Oakleaf has repaid more than its original home loan in principal and interest, but conversion of the remaining principal balance to a forgivable loan will provide some huge benefits for the property and its residents. It will allow Oakleaf to pay for important upcoming improvements such as roof replacement, exterior paint, asphalt repair, wood fencing, and more. Additionally, it will ensure that Cornerstone can continue to provide access to services for the residents. Cornerstone's on-site Healthy Homes program is recognized statewide. It's designed to promote household stability and resiliency with programming that addresses food security, health and wellness, economic stability, and fosters community building and support among neighbors. So thank you again for your consideration of this request and your support of affordable housing in our community.
Thank you, Amy. Next is Joanne Shatola, followed by Randall Berzer.
Thank you. Mayor Vinnis and council members, thank you for allowing me this time. My name is Joanne Chatola from Ward 5. Together with my husband, we own rental housing in Eugene and Springfield. My husband's a licensed contractor and I'm a CPA. And early on, we discovered that we had the skill sets to easily own, manage, and maintain property. We are independent rental owners and we do not use property management. But we are reasonable people, but we are business people. And as one council member said at the last meeting, renting is a business transaction. Okay, let's agree. It's a business transaction, so let's do our due diligence as in any business transaction. It's a lot of work to screen applicants, and many of the proposed tenant protections would cause unnecessary hardship on the landlords. It's not in the best interest of tenants to let them take on too much of a financial burden. When people obtain credit, their financial situation is reviewed. Credit standards are applied and they qualify or they don't. I'm confused on why this is being considered an unfair practice. As in any relationship, the personal element emerges. These tenants are now a part of our lives. But the business aspect is still in play. This is an investment. Proper screening and security deposits help mitigate risk. Business, higher the risk, the higher the reward. Clear. Higher the risk, the higher the rent. These are basic business principles of investing. Increase risk equal higher rent. Probably not your intention here. It's not us against them. When we provide housing, tenants need housing, it's a win-win. In my experience, my clients who own rental property are not getting rich. A lot of people seem to think if you run a business or you own a rental, you're a rich, entitled person who is out to take advantage of others. Not true at all. We're just providing something to others who may need it. I left last council meeting disturbed by how a few members thought so negatively of us owners. Very sad, it's not a war. A few bad landlords are not the majority. State tenant protections are sufficient and already in place. To recap, I believe statewide tenant protections are sufficiently in place, and I strongly oppose any additional citywide tenant protections. We're good people, and if the Law Center is seeing problems, it's because they see problems. There's a lot of tenants who there are no problems. The majority of tenants have no problems. They're not the ones going to the Law Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Next is Randall Berzer, followed by Tara Garkow. Randall, please unmute.
There we go. Hi, I'm Randy Berzer. I live in Ward 2, and I've been a rental owner in Eugene for 25 years. I'm a general contractor and a home inspector. Over the years, I've put a lot of work and money into my 3 rentals, and I want to provide a nice place for people to live, somewhere that I would feel comfortable living in. I am concerned about these proposals regarding the rental regulation, particularly those regarding credit scores and lowering security deposits. Rental owners want tenants who can and will pay the rent, can take care of the property, and be good neighbors. Unfortunately, not all tenants live up to these standards. Rental owners take a risk in taking over their property and handing over their properties to tenants. Tenants may not pay on time, they may damage the property, they may not be good neighbors, and they may break the lease. Another thing that I think is not really, I haven't heard anybody talk about is consider how these proposals are unfair to tenants who are responsible with their lives and have good credit. And I believe, people that have good credit deserve to have a good place to live. These proposals do nothing to create more housing, nothing to protect the rental owners from bad tenants, and are unfair to responsible tenants. So I encourage you to really think a lot more about before taking on any of these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Next is Tara Garkow, followed by Lynn Woodrich.
Hello, Mayor Vinnis, City Council and staff. My name is Tara Garkow. I'm a renter in Councilor Surratt's Ward 7, a current member of Ask Me Local 3267. I also serve on the board of directors at the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association, and I work for the Lane County Housing Authority, providing case management to families on Section 8. I know you are considering several renter protections today, and I urge you to take serious action and pass the displacement prevention assistance to protect renters like myself and my clients. In the last few months, several families on my caseload have received no-cause evictions, and I've witnessed the severe impact they have on low-income individuals and families in a market like ours where affordable housing options are scarce. In most cases, I've been able to connect these families with resources and advocates to help them avoid displacement, but the folks in our community I'm most concerned for are the ones that don't have an advocate on their side to connect them with resources and advise them of their tenants' rights. I'm not sure if any of you have done a recent rental housing search, but the market is cutthroat now more than ever, and many landlords and property management companies are charging unnecessarily exorbitant application fees and double security deposits to weed out applicants. Most of the families I serve don't have $3,000 to put down on a security deposit, especially when the eviction serving landlord has a full month to refund what's left of their previous deposit. I'll also point out that a person working a full-time job earning the local minimum wage at $12.75 an hour earns around a little over $2,000 a month gross, which doesn't even come close to meeting the income eligibility criteria for a one-bedroom, let's say around $1,000 a month. And that is what most local property management companies list on the rental criteria, which is they have to earn 3 times the rent. So for these reasons, I wholeheartedly believe these no-cause evictions are a primary contributor to homelessness in our community and causing real harm in our neighborhoods. At the same time, policies like displacement prevention assistance have been on the books in other cities like Portland since 2017 and have shown great success in protecting renters and blunting the number of families shoved into homelessness. This policy seems like a no-brainer for Eugene, and I really hope that you will pass it with all due haste. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tara. Next is Lynn Woodrich, followed by Allie Gartland.
My name is Lynn Woodrich. I'm the active Bethel Community Co-Chair living in Ward 6 with my 93-year-old dad, and I'm a homeowner in the Bethel portion of Ward 8. Thank you to Mayor Venus and Councilors Evans and Siret for attending our ABC Bethel Visioning General Meeting last Wednesday. I emailed all of you the Bethel Visions list. I hope you had an opportunity to look over the list of ideas for Bethel. I'm reminding you of the importance of an area plan for Bethel. We've been neglected for 40 years, and the neighbors need to have a voice in the future of Bethel. Snake River Justin is moving along with their development plan for the Bethel Justin Ponds land. Their neighborhood meeting to discuss their planned unit development of 132 units with 183 parking spaces will be on February 23rd. I'm anticipating a large turnout. Today, I saw an application from them for a property line adjustment. I emailed the developer, and the owner wants to create property lines so the 2 ponds will be separate from the developed area. The Snake River Properties developer has told us that he would be willing to have the city take over the large pond so the neighbors could access it for recreation and fishing where there are bass, carp, crappie, and trout. That is what we want. DEQ just sent out a report of the dioxins found in the soil across from the J.H. Baxter plant. The levels are at a dangerous level. The cleanup needs to happen for all the homes across from the plant very soon, not just the homes who agreed to have their soil tested. Please move up the Envision Eugene to help the Bethel area plan for a future where polluters don't poison our residents and developers don't take away the green spaces they enjoy. Bethel residents' voices need to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Next is Allie Gartland, followed by Deborah Gaudette.
Hi, my name is Allie Gartland, and I own and manage property in Ward 7. I wanted to address the proposed housing ordinances, as I feel strongly that doing any piecemeal legislation that only exists in Eugene would set a very bad precedent. I have no problem that rental owners and managers should always give a reference for a current tenant. Limiting deposits to 2 times rent is reasonable, and I personally have never done more than that. I can understand the rationale for not charging people for screening. However, if this is passed, I would require any applicant to submit a recent copy of their credit report and a criminal background check, which is likely to be burdensome for many as it can be difficult to obtain in a timely manner. When managing multifamily properties, I feel it's critical to be aware of any criminal histories for residents who live side by side. I am most concerned with the credit score requirement and termination procedures being considered. I don't feel it should be in the city's jurisdiction to pick a credit score minimum that 96% of people have, where someone can have multiple active accounts and collections, including with utilities or phone companies. Asking someone to leave within a 1-year period is challenging for most property owners and not something I take lightly and have rarely used except in egregious situations. The result would be an increase in more termination with cause notices, making it more challenging for a person to find a rental in the future. As that is uncomfortable and difficult to do, as it can result in more confrontation and on occasion with people who have violent tendencies, I would seriously contemplate moving the properties that we own and manage to larger management companies who are more focused on keeping rents at market rates. The only tool that these screening ordinances leave rental owners with to hedge the additional risk taken on is to essentially raise rents to whatever the market can bear, which for me would probably be about 20% higher at turnover. We all want to improve the current situation. Could the city promote co-op style housing developments like Square One does, but on city land with a condo focus that could help transition renters to become homeowners? This would create more housing and get more equity to renters. One last thing to point out is that these ordinances would put Eugene in the company of only a very few cities, New York, San Francisco, LA, and Portland. With Eugene being just a fraction of the size of the others, is this truly necessary? Oregon already has some of the most stringent rental housing rules in the country, and stricter rental housing codes that are particular to Eugene will push developers to Springfield and the vicinity, leaving Eugene behind in the development of more housing in the future, which is badly needed.
Thank you, Allie. Your time has concluded. Next is Deborah Gaudette, followed by Robin.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, I am Deborah Gaudette. Good evening. I'm sorry, I don't know what ward I'm in. And I want to say that I am wanting to talk to you about the renter ordinances that you have proposed. I am in full agreement with Scott Zakarian, Jason Evans, and most recently, it is important that the state governs these things. Like they said, it is way too hard to try to manage each different city and the ordinances. But without going over that again, what I do want to talk about is the actual economic evidence that tells us about the effects of rent control. I did send to you a copy of this. It is referenced by, it's a report published Thursday, October 18th, 2018 by Rebecca Diamond, Associate Professor of Economics, Stanford Graduate School of Business. And it studies what's the economic evidence tell us about rent control and other tight controls over landlords. And after she lists all of the compiling data that she has gathered, tracking the results of rent control and restrictions on landlords in major cities, she concludes her report with the following, and I'm going to quote, "Rent control appears to help affordability in the short run for current tenants, but in the long run decreases affordability, fuels gentrification, and creates negative externalities on the surrounding neighborhood. These results highlight that forcing landlords to provide insurance to tenants against rent increases can ultimately be counterproductive. If society desires to provide social insurance against rent increases, it may be less problematic to offer this subsidy in the form of a government subsidy or tax credit. This would remove landlords' incentives to decrease the housing supply and could provide households with the insurance they desire. A point of future research would be to design an optimal social insurance program to insure renters against large rent increases." We can tell what will happen to good tenants, or we can tell you, but the good tenants and good neighborhoods, or you can look at the data that's already available. And
Thank you, Deborah. Your time has concluded. Next is Robin, followed by Jennifer W. Robin, please unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor Venus and councilors. I'm Robin Miller, and I've recently inherited ownership in some single-family rental housing units in Ward 1. As explained in my recent letter, the Portland ordinance regulations being considered, if adopted, will place me in a very untenable situation. Historically, these units have provided well below market rental housing for several years, but more recently, in collaboration with the St. Vincent de Paul Assistance Program, they are now providing supportive housing for some very thankful veterans. When inherited this past year, the estate was forced to immediately decide whether to sell or continue renting these assets. I successfully argued for giving deference to the tenants. Sadly, the credibility of my argument is now in serious jeopardy, given the added burdens and financial impact these new regulations portend. The simple fact is, not a single provision being considered reduces the landlord's time burden, expense, or risk exposure. Moreover, the notion that tenant access and equity is somehow achieved independently from the availability of rental housing just doesn't comport with reality. Clearly, no availability implies no access, equity notwithstanding. Respectfully, I hope Eugene will choose to avoid those decisions invoking remorse to our north. Tenant interests might better be served if the city were to incentivize collaborations with existing rental owners by sharing the burdens and financial risks of tenant welfare so as to make more existing housing available and affordable, rather than pursuing ways to simply shift more risk and burdens onto rental housing providers. Obviously, I can't speak for the awesome supportive organization St. Vinny's, but my sense is they'd argue for encouraging more, not less, availability of affordable existing housing. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Robin. Next is Jennifer W., followed by Aaron Day.
Members of the council. My name is Jennifer Weinkoop, and I'm a portfolio manager with Income Property Management. We manage properties in all the wards except number 6. I appreciate being able to speak with you tonight regarding the proposed new housing ordinances. As you may know, IPM was founded here in Eugene in 1974, so our firm has been managing both market rate and affordable housing for the better part of 50 years. IPM manages properties in Eugene and throughout Oregon and Southwest Washington. The difficulty with ordinances such as that which is being proposed is that rather than applying to all properties in the state of Oregon, as I understand it, the proposed ordinances would apply to only those properties in Eugene proper, not to properties located in Springfield and other surrounding cities. Our position is that regulations such as these should be applied on a statewide basis rather than an individual locality. I would appreciate your consideration. I would appreciate your considering the difficulty posed by multiple separate ordinances that are enforced on a city-by-city basis. Such ordinances, do not help provide more housing, and in fact, through additional administrative and legal costs incurred, serve to increase the overall cost of housing. Thank you for your time and consideration tonight.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next is Aaron Day, followed by Chad. And Aaron, your hand was lowered, so I wanted to see if you still wanted to speak.
Sure, I'll forego my time and speak later in the meeting at the next agenda item. Thanks.
Actually, this is the only time that you have to speak.
Okay, then I will speak now.
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Aaron Day. I'm the Director of Real Estate Development and Asset Management for Dev Northwest. I'm here tonight to speak in support of the Polk 2.0 proposal located at 89 North Polk Street in Ward 7. The purpose of me being here tonight is to provide some additional context for request of city staff as to why the Polk 2.0 project might be penciling a bit higher than some of the other projects that you've seen come down the pipeline in the past. So first and foremost, I just want to acknowledge that in the affordable housing world, the POC 2.0 project is considered a small project, which is a different category of affordable housing than the larger multifamily LIHTC projects that you are used to seeing in Eugene. These two project typologies are inherently very different, and so comparing them is like comparing apples to oranges. As such, the small projects are also evaluated, funded, and monitored differently than the larger projects. So if you put a large project side by side to a small project, the large project will almost always win in terms of feasibility. So for example, the cost per unit is almost always higher for a small project, such as the POC 2.0 project, because there are fewer units to absorb the overall project costs. Along these same lines, unit size also makes a difference. A studio or SRO apartment requires the same systems, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, as a 1 or 2 or 3 bedroom. So the smaller units will almost always have a much higher cost per square foot. POC is not only a small project, but it also consists of all SROs except for the manager's unit, of course. Just to provide the council with some additional assurance around the project feasibility, I wanted to remind everybody that the project's primary funding source for this project is the state small projects NOFA. In that small projects NOFA, 13 projects were submitted and 6 were funded. So this project was vetted at the state level against similar projects and also by our third-party lender. All of them gave the thumbs up. You all are the last stop. Also, I want to call attention to the permanent supportive housing component of the POC 2.0 project, which increases both its short-term and its long-term costs in order to meet the individual needs of this particular community. We've seen over and over again that simply building standard affordable housing units and expecting individuals who need permanent supportive housing to be successful in those units just doesn't work. Lastly, I'd be remiss to state that the current real estate prices and the labor materials market doesn't factor into our current pro forma. That said, we have an awesome design of
Thank you, Erin. Your time has concluded. Next is Chad, followed by Michael Havlick.
Hello, thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Chad. I'm in Ward 3, and I'd like to speak once again about the issue of wireless safety in our city. I would also like to submit some documents into the public record. These documents are court documents from a recent court case that was filed and against the FCC. And the court documents show over 3,000 scientific studies showing harm to humans and animal biology by non-ionizing radiation. I'd like to detail one of those studies in which researchers asked nearly 1,000 women over the age of 18 with confirmed pregnancies to wear small magnetic field monitoring devices for 24 hours. Exposure was divided into 4 quartiles, and after controlling for confounding variables, they found that miscarriages occurred in a normal range in the first quartile, and then in the next 3 quartiles, miscarriages occurred in a far higher range with those higher exposure levels. So I would like to just state once again that we don't need any new exposures, and the new all of this new technology going in with the 5G towers and the millimeter waves is very concerning to people who have been following this, to people who are sensitive to this type of radiation, and to everybody, city workers included. Please do not turn on the new 5G towers and try to help us get them out of the residential areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Next is Michael Havlick, followed by Ryan Moore.
Mayor Venice and members of the council. Hello, my name is Michael Havlick, Deputy Executive Director with Multifamily Northwest. We represent approximately 250,000 apartments statewide and more than 1,350 units in the city of Eugene. During the public commentary period at the January 10th council meeting, I expressed my concern for the staying power of small rental owners, and a few of whom you heard from today, and the critical need to review the data contained in the rental registry. I still maintain this is necessary to evaluate. Many housing providers remain to watch all of the testimony, which has since been viewed by over 170 people. And this is what we heard. We heard that the ordinances are not about supply, that they're about consumer protection, equity, and access. Also, from Mr. Morris, we heard that housing providers are predatory and they're taking advantage of renters in large numbers, which he substantiated through their hotline. From Mr. Moore, we heard that these policies are nothing new and they don't diminish housing stock. He stated that the fear was totally unfounded and suggested that he's looked into data in other cities. And from Councillor Keating, who was a little appalled when he hears rental owners refer to themselves as housing providers. To these messages, I have a couple of thoughts. First, equity and access are inseparable from adequate supply. You can't have one without the other. And next, when claiming rental owners are not leaving this industry, please show data, because data to the contrary does exist. And lastly, we don't accept the need to rush into a suboptimal decision or that polarizing arguments are the path forward. I'm preparing to deliver several documents to the City Council that contain an extensive survey and an analysis of the survey, and also a study conducted by Eco Northwest on the Portland's market. As a final thought, my perspective as a licensed principal broker in Oregon is that regulation of rental housing belongs at the state level in a manner consistent with the Oregon statutes and administrative rules published by the Oregon Real Estate Agency. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael. Next is Ryan Moore, followed by Zach Mulholland.
Hello, Mayor Venice and City Council. Good to see you again and happy Monday. My name is Ryan Moore. I live in Ward 8. I wanted to give my own personal story of not being welcome in my parents' home and having to move out as a young teenager, not being able to because I didn't make 3 times the monthly rent for basically any property I could find. But instead, I would rather respond to some of the comments that we've heard tonight. I think that might be more helpful for you, hopefully. So first off, we did hear a lot of talk tonight about fears about patchwork protections and different regulations in different cities adding to cost. You know, I understand that argument, but it's kind of already what we have on the books right now with things like the Eugene Rental Housing Code that do not exist in other cities. These are already different protections available in different places. And on top of that, I think those landlords and property managers who encounter this sort of patchwork problem are ones that have properties in multiple cities. They're not the small mom and pops who are less able to eat that cost, right? Furthermore, I have spent a lot of time working in the state legislature. It was a very real consideration starting there with some of these protections. It's not feasible in mine and other people's opinions at this point. It may well become an option after Eugene takes action. I hope to work on that, and I hope that my landlord colleagues would join me in that effort. It sounds like they're eager to do it. I fear, however, that they're so voluminous here because they don't want that next step to be taken. The next thing we heard tonight, let's see here, was the fears about unintended consequences. Again, it seems completely logical on its face. However, literally any policy fix that you implement will have unintended consequences. There's no way to predict everything that's going to happen. The beauty of our democratic system is that institutions like the City Council persist. We'll have a City Council, hopefully for many years to come, who will be able to tinker with these protections and resolve any sort of unintended consequence that we didn't see coming. I wanted to end with the topic that it's ridiculously profitable to be a landlord right now, ridiculously expensive to be a renter. CETA has data showing these protections are badly needed. You see it every month.
Thank you, Ryan. Your time has concluded. Next is Zach Mulholland, followed by Lisa Arkin.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Zachary Mulholland. I live in Ward 6. I'm speaking on my own behalf tonight. The subject tonight is climate funding. Last year in the springtime, the Sustainability Commission made a recommendation that the City Council create a climate fund. I later recommended that the Budget Committee do a deep dive and look at climate funding and homelessness funding and identify funding sources. Councillor Zelenka then took the lead and he put in a work session poll on climate and homelessness funding. 6 months later, we had that work session last month. And even though a majority of councillors supported identifying priorities for funding for climate, no motion was made to actually start the process that staff recommended to identify those priorities. I would ask councillors if you support identifying priorities for climate funding and how to fund them, please speak up. Councillor Zelenka, you were in the lead on this before. Please push forward, put in a motion to start the staff recommended process to identify priorities for climate funding and how to fund them. Potentially include the Budget Committee and the Sustainability Commission in helping to identify those priorities and to analyze the options for funding, including an opportunity for public input when possible, so we can move that conversation forward. Please don't let that conversation die and slip silently into the night. It is incredibly, incredibly important, and the city should move forward on identifying priorities for climate funding and how to fund them. Please move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zach. Next is Lisa Arkin, followed by Mike Grudzian.
Good afternoon. This is Lisa Arkin, Executive Director of Beyond Toxics, living in Ward 1, but caring about our whole city. And I'm speaking today about a sense of despair and despondency for those of us who have cared about the heavy burden of pollution in West Eugene. We're asking you all for help and meaningful partnerships. My comments are meant to give you just 3 of many examples of how West Eugene residents are often dismissed and excluded. First of all, I want to thank Councillor Matt Keating for his supportive responses to Bethel residents who gave testimony today to the El Rapa Board to ask for more citizen representation from communities impacted by air pollution on the Citizens Advisory Committee. Unlike Mr. Keating, a few El Rapa Board members made disparaging remarks to those Bethel residents, suggesting that they did not have the capacity to contribute to a Citizens Advisory Committee. And some of those comments, to tell you the truth, had a veneer of discrimination to them. And that was really a slap in the face to those people who testified. And residents have also heard dismissive responses from staff at regulatory agencies. Bethel residents suffering from asthma or more serious illnesses have been subjected to frequent noxious stenches from industrial polluters, have been told that, quote, not every bad industrial smell they breathe is harmful, close quote, only later to learn that there have been spikes of naphthalene in the air and dangerous levels of dioxin in their soils. And thank you to Councilors Surratt and Evans and Mayor Vinnis, who attended the ABC neighborhood meeting and heard people ask the city to do more to protect the residents who are dealing with dioxin contamination, brain damaging air toxics, and polluted groundwater. We've asked for a cease and desist order, but I've heard suggestions that the neighborhood needs to wait until there's more testing to be done. But they've been waiting for decades for help, especially since 2012 when the DEQ identified J.H. Baxter as an intentional and repeated polluter, and have been waiting decades for their elected officials to join them to put a stop to the situation at J.H. Baxter. Please work with us. Please help to find effective and timely solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next is Mike Grudzian, followed by Paul Solomon.
Good evening, Mayor Vinnis, and always good to see you. I'm a big fan of your work. And good evening, councilors. My name is Mike Grudzian. I am a very happy resident of Ward 4 and Jennifer Yeh. I'll start by just saying I oppose the proposed changes to the ordinance. particularly, and I'm going to say it like other people, due to the double jeopardy of different state and city ordinances. Particularly, I'm concerned about unintended consequences and taking any action that's not grounded in evidence-based current research. But, you know, I'd like to address another elephant in the room where there seems to be this us versus them. There's these bad landlords and there's these tenants. And I'm going to say my philosophy as a landlord is I want to provide great long-term housing to great long-term tenants. That's it. But now to kind of dispel some of this us versus them, I want to say I'm your neighbor. You see me in the store. I've lived in Eugene for 25 years. I'm a decorated Marine Corps veteran. I do live by the ethos, honor, courage, and commitment. I'm a husband, a father, a brother, a son. I'm a lifetime blood donor, 220 lifetime blood donations, 28 years as a Rotarian. I'm a past board member of the Eugene Rotary Club. I'm a member of the Rental Owners Association of Lane County, Oregon Real Estate Investors Association. I'm a fundraiser for Square One Villages. I've spent the last 8 winters as an Egan Warming Center volunteer, and I'm actually serving Wednesday night because it's going to turn cold. I want people to have housing, but from what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing effects in Portland and everything else, if it reaches a point where it's too onerous to be a landlord, I'll sell my properties. None of them will go to any low income people, and it's just going to reduce the housing supply. Help me provide good housing to tenants. Let's talk about increasing the housing supply. Let's talk about supplements for people needing housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next is Paul Solomon, followed by A's phone. Paul, please unmute.
Good evening, Mayor Venice, members of the council. For the record, my name is Paul Solomon. I'm the executive director at Sponsors. I'm here today to express my support for Homes for Good and Sponsors' request for home funds and system development charge waivers for the 52-unit permanent supportive housing project we're calling the Coleman. Sponsors is a national leader in the delivery of reentry services. We operate 20 buildings on 7 sites in Lane County with over 240 units of housing for individuals with criminal histories and ancillary programs. Our work is backed up by a growing body of evidence that supports the efficacy of housing interventions for people with criminal histories. A recent rigorous third-party evaluation of The Way Home, a permanent supportive housing intervention designed to serve 125 homeless, high-risk individuals releasing from state prison, has shown remarkable results at the 3-year mark. This partnership between Sponsors, Homes for Good, and Lane County Parole and Probation has a remarkable 6% recidivism rate compared to state and local rates of 24 to 28%. Additionally, after 3 years, 92% of all participants were still stably housed. We've been on an incarceration binge in this state and country for the past 3 decades. One of the byproducts of incarcerating so many people is that approximately 95% will return to the communities they came from. Annually, over 12,000 people cycle in and out of the Lane County Jail, and many more are released from state prison. In response, Sponsors, in partnership with Homes for Good, has acted aggressively to address the housing needs of this vulnerable population. We have a 20+ year history of working together to develop affordable, supportive housing to people with conviction histories. The Coleman is named after the late Dr. Edwin Coleman and his wife Charmaine, who've been stalwart supporters of Sponsors since its genesis in 1973. Spanning 5 decades, the Coleman support for Sponsors, including serving on the founding board, attending every fundraising event, performing music at live events, public advocacy, and mentoring Sponsors participants. We are excited to honor the Coleman's legacy in this way. This project has the potential to dramatically improve the lives of people with conviction histories in our community. We very much appreciate the council's consideration of our request for home funds for this much needed project. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next is A's phone, followed by Catherine Rogers.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening. I'd like to speak to the tenant landlord laws. I'm all for fair tenant landlord agreements, as I've had varying experiences as a tenant myself, one of the more challenging being a no-cause eviction just a couple years ago, possibly even from somebody on this call tonight. However, I ultimately see this landlord as part of our community. I should add that it was my business that got evicted, so it was a little bit different in the sense that my livelihood, my employees' livelihoods were all on the line. I couldn't just go stay with family and friends as I searched for a new place to live. I needed a new office. My business requires brick and mortar location. I can't operate remotely. So this eviction really made a big impact on me because I didn't just lose space to rent, but I forfeited income until I found a new place to put my office. I shared this story because I really, really feel the vulnerability, the lack of control, the equity that so many tenants face when there's an imbalanced relationship between tenants and landlords. I feel and understand the sentiment that Councillor Keating has expressed as a fellow tenant. Last meeting, Councillor Keating also mentioned how landlords and tenants are engaging in a business transaction, and I agree with that. In any business relationship, there has to be fairness on both sides. As a tenant, I truly want landlords to feel they are in fair agreements as well, because when there's an unfair agreement, ultimately neither party walks away happy. I appreciate Councillor Keating and others raising the point last meeting that Eugene's market rent is too high for tenants to afford. This points to the actual tenant issue. As a tenant, the application process isn't what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about affordability and accessibility in the sense that there are enough rentals on the market to choose from. This is what will increase tenant equity, as all of us are concerned with. Landlords are saying these tenant screening proposals create further imbalance because they lower tenant screening standards. If someone can't afford an option, it won't make it more affordable by allowing them to rent something that's too expensive. The true problem isn't discrimination of the application process, but the fact that there aren't rentals available. I hope that we can put our energy into that. Thank you, Mayor and councilors, for considering this view.
Thank you. Could you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Alicia.
Thank you, Alicia. Next is Catherine Rogers, followed by Steve Oakes.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Rogers, and I live in Ward 7, and I'm also a landlord in this ward as well. I'm opposed to the rental regulations, specifically the first come, first serve. I do want to invite the City of Eugene Council to join a little book club just for yourselves and read the book, Why Culture Matters by Dr. David Rose. On the topic of equity and culture, Dr. Rose has numerous publications on the topic of theory of cooperation, economic ethics, and the moral foundation of economic behavior. In his last book, Why Culture Matters Most, he points out that important features of prosperous societies, among many, are strong property rights. Here, he also states that property rights are of little value if the government cannot be trusted to fairly enforce them. If the wealth one creates can be easily taken by individuals or by the state, there is no point in exerting effort to invest to create wealth. Currently, there are laws in place to aid in equity regarding the rental housing in Eugene. Let's get good at enforcing those. I want to give hindsight on unintended consequences regarding first come, first serve. I very recently had the bad experience of my tenants passing away, an elderly married couple. The house had become run down last year due to their declining health, and things like yard work were not kept to our agreed contract. After my personal expenses of yard maintenance, new carpet, painting the interior, along with taking time off from my real job, we relisted the house for rent, a 4-bed, 2-bath in a quiet cul-de-sac, which the neighbors have lived there for over 20 years. The neighborhood soon realized the house would be ready for new neighbors, and the elderly couple across the street specifically asked for a family with kids if we could accommodate that. There's only one family there with small children on the block, and it would be nice for them to have someone to play with. Personally, I have been following the current regulations the city is trying to impose and decided to see how it would go. That's a hot commodity right now with a house that size. And within the first 2 hours, there were 8 families that contacted me. Keeping track of the first completed application, there was a nice young couple with 2 dogs, no kids. The other applicants had kids, but we were unable to provide them housing because guess what? First come, first serve. I want to know, is that what equity looks like when during a housing shortage, 2 people are renting because they were first in line, a large family home? Our new tenants are wonderful, but for the last 2 weeks, I think about the disappointment on the neighbors' faces when they found out there would not be children moving in. Equity and community culture where you live are best regulated by those living directly within the neighborhood. People want to live here because of the culture, and the current regulations can unintentionally harm that, and I have now seen it firsthand. Please feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Catherine. Your time has concluded. Next is Steve Oakes, followed by Pamela Kittleson.
Good evening, Mayor and City Councilors. My name is Steve Oakes. I am the Real Estate Development Director for Homes for Good Housing Agency. And I'll be providing comment tonight on a request to be looking at later this evening surrounding home funding for the Coleman, a 52-unit permanent supportive housing development at the northeast corner of Highway 99 and Roosevelt, located in Councilor Surratt's ward. As Paul Solomon just mentioned, Homes for a Good Housing Agency, Lane County, and Sponsors Incorporated are honored to partner to develop a new permanent supportive housing apartment community. The Coleman will be a mixed-use 4-story community that will provide 52 homes, supportive services, office space, meeting rooms, and Sponsors Reentry Resource Center. The Coleman will serve people with conviction histories who have successfully completed Sponsors Transitional Housing Program, by providing permanent housing with a wide array of on-site supportive services. Sponsors will provide these services to people living on-site, as well as to their clients who live elsewhere. The land for this community has been donated by Lane County and is located right across the street from Sponsors Roosevelt Crossing Transitional Housing Community and directly adjacent to the new Lane County Parole and Probation Services Hub. To facilitate the development of the Coleman, Homes for Good has requested over $1 million of home funds, as well as $311,000 in systems development charge waivers from the Eugene Springfield Home Consortium. Questions have arisen regarding the application for the home funds related to the project costs shown in the proposed budgets. All projects from Homes for Good are competitively bid and prioritize outreach to Section 3 low-income individuals and businesses, as well as minority, women, and emerging small businesses in the bidding process. The Coleman is also subject to Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements. There are various factors that contribute to the high cost per unit, but by far the most significant factor is the recent escalation in construction costs. We submitted public comment earlier today that provides further information on these construction costs and provides more of a breakdown on that. And we just ask that you please fully fund the home funding request from Homes for Good along with the Dev Northwest POPE 2.0 proposal. This will allow us to apply for the remaining funds from multiple other sources and build this important development that will serve the community for the next 60 years as a stepping stone for people needing a hand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next is Pamela Kittleson, followed by Darren Stone. Pamela, please unmute.
Hi. Hi. I am Pam Kittleson, and here are some of the details around the dismantling of the camp on 13th and Chambers that you may not be aware of. Obviously, this camp was meant to be a show-off camp that the city was doing something about our houseless issue. It's also obvious that, as usual, closing the camp was just another sweep, another displacement, nothing more than reshuffling the problem so that people don't have to look at it. There are many people that didn't go to or were not accepted at these warm, safe spots. Taking a spot at St. Vinny's means that you have to surrender to the medieval morality of a Catholic organization. No longer have your own tent, can't bring your animal, you can't sleep in the same tent with your partner, even if you are married. You cannot cook. You can't keep your own food. You would probably have to throw away half of your stuff. The safe spots are only open and available during the night. You have to leave during the day and return at a specific time, or you can't get in. What if they have an online job? If you miss 2 nights at a safe spot, they kick you out. What if you have a night job? When the camp was cleared, many of the residents wanted to keep their independence and autonomy and moved to Washington Park. They asked the park's people, the camp's people, if they could take a load and be back. The workers told them yes, only for them to come back and be refused admittance to their own belongings. And they had to watch as the help threw away half of their stuff to make sure the area was nice and clean for the photo shoot. Do you have any idea what it's like to lose half of your belongings? If you were to lose one of your cars, you'd be upset. If you were actually to be on the ground and witness how this all went down, you would see that it's been handled with a callous disregard and disrespect for the humanity of our housed. I am deeply disappointed and disturbed by this progressive city. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Next is Darren Stone, followed by Bridget.
Hi, good evening. My name is Darren Stone. I live in Ward 2. I am a principal of a real estate and property management company here in Eugene, and I was also fortunate to serve on the Renters Protection Committee. Tonight, I want to encourage the City Council to reject the proposed renter protections, and I wanted to share a little bit about the process that we went through. I was initially really excited to be a part of this committee when I read the charge that said the role of the Renters Protections Committee was to identify priority tools and strategies to protect renters and prevent displacement in areas with changing housing market conditions in Eugene. I was excited, and my experience on the committee was there was not a dive into the data from the Eugene Renters Experience Survey. There wasn't a meeting of the minds. The chair handed us a copy of the Portland Fair Ordinance, split the committee into 2, labeled one tenant advocates, the other landlord advocates, and asked the landlord advocates to respond to recommendation made by the tenant advocates about the Portland Fair Ordinance in Eugene. It was a frustrating experience. It was a bit like being asked to serve on a committee to make recommendations on stopping the spread of COVID, to be told you can only talk about zinc and ivermectin. I would like to see the City Council put together a group that has meaningful experience that I haven't seen represented on the Housing Policy Board, and take meaningful actions for tenants that are struggling in Eugene. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Next is Bridget, followed by Victoria Whitman.
Hi, my name is Bridget Butler. I live in Ward 7, and I'm an outreach worker with Black Thistle Street Aid. As a service provider directly supporting residents at Washington Jefferson Park multiple times weekly for over 2 years, I'd like to request full transparency about the city's future plan for the site. After seeing the eviction of 13th and Chambers, with only 1 week's notice to service providers and no plan in place for residents who couldn't or wouldn't go to safe spots, I have concerns for how the city plans to proceed at WJ. Safe spots are great for a select few individuals, but for many people, they will yet again have nowhere to go and face continued criminalization in the middle of winter in a still ongoing pandemic. I'm concerned that there are less safe spots available than there are people who would be evicted. Also, many of the safe spots aren't appropriate or accessible for people depending on their criminal and substance use history, trauma, mental or physical health conditions, pet ownership, or relationships with service providers. Until the city can take into account the many different people requiring shelter and ways to fully support their needs, people must be allowed to remain and be supported in the minimal shelter spaces and communities that they've been able to forge for themselves. Martin v. Boise ensures that people experiencing homelessness cannot be cited or arrested for sleeping outdoors when no appropriate shelter is available. I would also like to point to OHA and CDC guidance that strongly urges sheltering in place during the pandemic. I request that city hold off on evicting residents at WJ until there are appropriate housing options available for all residents. And if and when the city has a set plan for moving residents at the park, I request that service providers be given at least a month's notice. Currently, our team, CORE, the Alliance, Whitebird, Shelter Care, Oregon Law Center, and many others work with residents there weekly. Ongoing evictions cause irreparable harm and trauma for the people involved and forces service providers to spend valuable time and resources relocating people, replacing survival supplies, and generally supporting our community. Offering people shelter that is not appropriate for them, or else face being given citations, going to jail, being moved without a destination, or losing their property, and being harassed continually by police and city workers is not offering shelter. It's coercive and it's violence. I look forward to your transparency about the plans for this site, plans for supporting current residents at WJ, and ways you will avoid further violating human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. Next is Victoria Whitman, followed by phone ending in 327.
Hi, my name is Victoria Whitman. I've been a realtor in Eugene for the past 24 years. I work primarily with residential buyers, almost exclusively. People that are looking to buy their homes, a lot of first-time home buyers, people that do try to buy their first, their second rentals. I'm also a landlord. I have a small family business and we manage them ourselves. I live in Ward 1. Most of our rentals are, no, I live in Ward 2. Most of our rentals are in Ward 1. And by small, we've got about 35 rentals, which may sound like a lot to some of you, but that is something that my father has worked on. I have worked on. I lived in them. I bought and lived in them and fixed them up. Ryan Moore was saying that landlords make tons of money. They do that only if they've been owning them for a really long time, and it takes a lot of money to continue to keep those properties as good, viable homes for good, viable tenants. We take a lot of pride in providing, when I put a rental up, I end up with over 20 applications within one day because we do rent below market rent. We do try to have things. I agree. I think rental prices right now are outrageous and we try to keep ours very fair. But what I'm seeing is a lot of small owners selling. I've had at least 10 of them in the last 2 years decide to get out of the market. That's not all bad because we also have a lot of people trying to buy houses, but it doesn't help our rental thing. And I don't feel like these ordinances are going to help. I'm not concerned about the screening. There's nothing in the screening that I do that I would do differently. But I am concerned about some of the deposits. Actually, not being allowed to look at a credit score matters. I would support things like the Sponsors Project, giving more breaks so that more housing gets built. We simply have a housing shortage. That is the biggest problem that is happening. It's happening with sales and it's happening with rentals. And some of these ordinances are just going to make it worse.
Thank you, Victoria. Next is phone ending in 327, followed by Eme Okati Oyeken. Phone ending in 327, please unmute.
Okay. Hi, this is William Smith from Ward 1. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I'd like to talk about wireless safety and broadband infrastructure. And first, I'd like to second the comments made by Chad earlier on wireless safety. And I'd like to add a news item that has been passed on to me a couple times from people. An ABC News article, or I guess video on Instagram about airline CEOs requesting that the FCC halt the 5G rollout because of concerns about interference with planes' ability to land, especially in turbulent weather. Thought that might interest council since we do have an airport. And also this is an example of unintended consequences, quite serious unintended consequences. And then if you add some of what Chad said earlier about how it affects our biology, our more sensitive biology, I think the picture is getting clearer and clearer that this should be a no-go. And then on broadband infrastructure, again, a reminder that it's completely safe, it's underground, it uses glass, which carries an enormous amount of light. And there's also an unintended consequence and a positive one. Cities and countries that have actually gone this way in a big way have been stunned at the unintended consequences, the positive consequences, the innovation, new startups, economic development, some of which I've talked about before. I guess that'll be all for this installment. I'll be back on how to make it happen, because why to make it happen is clear and clear. I think we've made it clear, but how and how cities are doing it needs to be addressed, and I will do that in a future public forum. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Next is M.A. Okoti Oyekan.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Venice and City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony this evening. My name is M.A. Okoti Oyekan. She, her pronouns. I'm a climate justice strategist with Breach Collective, and I live in City of Eugene, Ward 3. I'd like to just quickly thank everyone that came out to speak about the renter protections. There's a lot I could say, but I just want to emphasize that what we're balancing and what is in the balance is a status quo or a business as usual that has prioritized capital accumulation at the expense of the same people over and over again. And I think these renter protections are just an intentional deviation from that status quo because it's not working. Because you can look at the past 2 years and we can't just keep going that way. So we need to try something different. And I hope that you can open your hearts and think about what you're willing to give right now. I know it's hard, but just think more about that and resonate on that, please. But I'm mostly here to speak on behalf of or in support of this council's actions last November on the motions that are in support of fossil-free Eugene's demands. And I've spoken with a few of you over the past few months, and I'm really happy about your enthusiasm towards equitable building decarbonization. Just want to share some reflections about the larger context of this work. We see $3.5 billion of investment in home weatherization coming from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. And just a few days ago, the first of its kind Building Performance Standards Coalition with 33 states and local governments dedicated to delivering cleaner, healthier, and more affordable homes. Our contemporaries in Portland are actually on that coalition. It'll be really great for us to get on there too. At the state level, we have legislation on rights to cooling and heat pump subsidies pending in this legislative session against a backdrop of historic action last year with 3 sweeping energy justice bills. Locally, members of the Lane County Home Builders Association saying that when it comes to gas, we're at the end of an era and it's a matter of how quickly the transition will be. And professors at Lane County, Lane Community College Energy Management Program, who are training the next generation of building auditors who emphasize that labor considerations are a concern of them. So think about these processes and these concerns, and I just urge an open and equitable public engagement processes as you move forward with your work session.
Thank you, M.A. Your time has concluded. And Mayor, that concludes the public forum for tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a robust public forum. I appreciate all of the folks who came to speak and your patience to work through it. And thank you, Naya, for navigating that whole long public forum. And Councillor Clark has had his hand up for a long time from the very beginning. So Councillor Clark and then Councillor Surratt.
Thank you, Mayor. I heard a few things that spawned some thoughts, and I wrote some notes. And I just want to say thank you to everyone, and I mean everyone, who came and spoke to us. Some of these decisions are hard, they're challenging, they're complicated, and I appreciate having more things to think about, whether there's something that I would tend to agree with or not. It makes me think about it, and I appreciate it very much. I just wanted to say that I agree very much with Alicia and Victoria and Darren. What we have is a housing supply problem, and I think that's obvious. If we had a 10% vacancy rate in our community, none of these problems would exist. Landlords would bend over backwards to get tenants and offer bonuses. And, you know, I think that's fairly obvious. To have some fun with my friend, Councillor Zelenka, I would say these particular ordinances that the testimony were about are more silver buckshot. Got it right that time, in that, you know, it's just another thing that adds to the cost of housing. And to prove that point, I would say that most of the title and escrow companies in town put out a monthly report to anybody in this business about the nature of the market. And last month's report from Cascade Title Company showed what most of the others do, comparative data about year-over-year costs and number of sales and all that sort of thing. I thought the information was interesting from Cascade Title because it showed median price per square foot and the differences between Eugene and Springfield. So homes that sold in Eugene and Springfield December comparatively, Eugene was 3% more expensive per square foot than Springfield. But when you look at median rental prices per square foot, Eugene was 14% more expensive than Springfield. And for me, that's the difference in regulation, at least in part. There are other differences, obviously. The way I'd like to move forward with these things is for us to have clearer information from the folks in the Housing Policy Board. I'd like to have some metrics. I'd like to know specifically what outcomes they are hoping that these renter protections would fix, and what are the specific goals, and then what are the metrics to measure whether or not that occurred. I have questions about whether or not those outcomes would be achieved, and frankly, I think we'd see the opposite result. As you've heard from landlords tonight, they'll have very little choice but to raise rents as a result. And I don't think it will be helpful. I think it'll hurt people. And lastly, I want to say that I appreciate Lisa Arkin's testimony. I think this council should take the J.H. Baxter and Bethel situation more seriously than we are. And I know there are regulatory agencies to do the work, but I think we should do more as well. It frankly concerns me considerably, and I'd be willing to act on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Surratt, and then Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone who came to speak. Really appreciate hearing from you and the passion that you bring to the topics that you're speaking on. I want to point out, and I'm mainly going to speak to the renter protection testimony. So the City Council today approved our housing implementation pipeline plan, which is our coordinated plan to work to increase our housing supply. So for those who are saying that's the problem, we are also working to try and address that problem as well. But as I said at the last public forum, these renter protection proposals we're looking at are not intended to try and solve the supply problem. They are trying to solve, to help mitigate the impacts of a landscape where renters, particularly of a certain economic class, are very disadvantaged in finding housing that they can afford and get even access to. And I want to say that it's not this council that has set up an us versus them dynamic. We do have evidence of major challenges that people face when they're forced to seek new housing with little notice and no financial support, and they're in competition with, you know, hundreds of others in the marketplace. We also know there are great landlords who provide much needed housing at a fair price and with fair business practices, but unfortunately, there are others who do not. At the last council meeting or public forum, I believe Councillor Ye made a plea to folks, rental property owners, to provide specific reasons that our specific proposals are not workable for you, but we're not really receiving that. What we've heard a lot tonight was there should only be statewide regulation. There shouldn't be city by city regulation. Okay, well, that's a position, but that doesn't address why these particular regulations might put you at a disadvantage. And also there might be unintended consequences. So having actual impacts articulated to us would be very helpful as we discern which of these pieces we might go forward with, which ones we might not, how we might modify them. I have to say I'm very concerned about the testimony that was given indicating referencing the Why Culture Matters dynamic and saying that people with children should be given priority over people without children. And I'd like a second round, Mayor, because I don't want to try to rush through these comments.
Okay, Councillor Keating.
There we go. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks to everyone who came out and provided testimony tonight's public forum. In particular, Ward 2 residents, Elliot Farron, Stephanie Turnbull, Eric Lundberg, who corrected himself via email to me, stated he was a Ward 4 resident, actually a Ward 2 resident. Randy Berzer, Darren Stone, Victoria Whitman. Apologies if I forgot any other Ward 2 residents. I appreciate the testimony. And I do just want to turn down the temperature just a bit in regards to the real or perceived us versus them. A day after last week's meeting, I was sitting here in the kitchen and having a cup of coffee thinking about, well, what incentives or carrot could council provide to landlords who keep folks housed for multiple years or who don't participate in rent spikes? What does that look like? Is it an energy tax credit? Is it what sort? Let's have the give and take conversation. And I welcome the opportunity to meet in person as I did today at the Hideaway Bakery. I'll take any in-person meeting with folks who are fully vaccinated and masked. And if you're not, that's cool too. It's not cool, but we can always Zoom. Some of the ideas that came out of the meeting today with landlords revolved around education. And I heard this brought up again in testimonies tonight, longing to be knowledgeable of various ordinance and law. Let's find ways to send tenant protections to landlords and tenants every time there's an agreement or a lease signed. Let's find ways to have landlord and tenant education sessions at the library, perhaps. But I don't want to just rely on the state. If we rely on the state, as it was pointed out, it may be too late. Eugene can and should be a leader in regards to tenant protections. And yes, it's a business transaction. And yes, both landlords and tenants have a mutual interest, because the more folks who are housed longer, the better for our community. So I'm open to the conversations. I agree or disagree where you're coming from in regards to testimony. Just know I have gratitude and a huge amount of thanks for the courage to step up and have your voice heard. Thanks so much, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Sarrett, want to come back for a second round?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I'm just concerned about testimony. This is, I guess, against the specific proposal that a rental unit be given to the first qualified applicant. And the point was made that folks in the cul-de-sac, when they realized the property was open for rent, asked the landlord to try to make sure that a couple with children were prioritized over a couple without children. Now, being a married couple without children, I find that pretty offensive. And I am not versed in the details of rental law, but I think it may be illegal to discriminate against renters with children. So it may not be illegal to discriminate against those without, but I do not think that is a legitimate way to be deciding who should be allowed to have housing and who shouldn't. If that house was up for sale, the neighbors couldn't be determined who would be allowed to purchase it based on their own desires of what they want to see in their neighbor and the culture of that neighborhood. The desires of other residents about who should live in the house next door is exactly what perpetuated whites only covenants in housing across this country that are now illegal. And the idea of choosing one tenants based on characteristics of their family type is exactly the opposite of seeking equity and fairness in our housing in this community. And I hope that's a dynamic that other landlords reject. I'm glad to hear Councillor Clark supporting the idea of us taking stronger action to support our Bethel neighbors. I wouldn't characterize it as we are not taking it seriously. I would say the city manager and staff are taking it very seriously. The mayor, Councillor Evans and myself, and I know Councillor Groves had wished to be at that Active Bethel neighborhood meeting last week. You know, we tried to reassure residents that we were going to push city staff to make sure that we were looking at all the ways in which we might, as a city, support and help mitigate the harms that those residents are experiencing, even while DEQ goes through their process. So I don't know what that will look like. We didn't know what that would look like, but that's definitely top of mind for those of us who represent Bethel.
Okay, thank you all. Actually, I want to thank all my colleagues for all of your comments, which were really, really thoughtful and very helpful. So I appreciate all of the back and forth, and again, appreciate all the folks who came to testify tonight. And with that, we are officially finished with the public forum part of this meeting and ready to move on to a couple of action items that we have before us. The first one, action adoption of a resolution approving a low-income rental housing property tax exemption for property located on Green Lane in Eugene, Oregon, assessors map 1704-1233, tax lot 00304, assessors property account number 1740339, applicant Metropolitan Affordable Housing Corporation, DBA Cornerstone Community Housing. And Assistant City Manager, is there, I see Ellen, is somebody going to speak to this a little bit, or?
We can, if that would be helpful. You know, all three of these items are related, these next three items are related to affordable housing action. And it's a follow-up to your January 12th work session that you had on these topics. As you said, the first two items are related to the Cornerstone Community Housing Affordable Housing Development called the Oakleaf Village. The first item for your consideration is the LURPT renewal of the 20-year-old development. And the second item to consider is the modification of the 2001 development loan to improve long-term financial stability for the development. And then the last action, I know you started with the first one, but I just thought I'd go ahead and talk about all of them. The third action item is to consider recommendations for federal home funding for two projects that would create 63 units of affordable housing for people experiencing homelessness and at risk of homelessness. The community staff, community development staff are available, as you mentioned, Mayor, if you want any additional information before you guys vote. And also wanted to say that we heard several comments tonight in the public forum from folks about these projects. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Surratt, I'm going to let you put the motion on the table.
Sounds good, Mayor. I move to adopt a resolution approving a low-income rental housing property tax exemption for property located on Green Lane in Eugene, Oregon, Assessor's Map 17-04-12-33, tax lot 00304, Assessor's Property Account Number 1740339. Applicant Metropolitan Affordable Housing Corporation, doing business as Cornerstone Community Housing.
Second.
Any questions? Councilor Ye.
Yeah, thank you. I have a brief statement I need to make. I consulted with the city attorney. And so first of all, sorry, my husband is currently serving on the board for Cornerstone Community Housing. So I consulted with our city attorney and have been advised that his service on the board does not create a potential or actual conflict of interest. But I did just want to make sure it was that I publicly acknowledged his service on the board, because the council will be making decisions that would financially affect Cornerstone tonight.
Thank you very much for putting that out there. And if there are no other comments or questions, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That passes 6-0. Thank you very much. And the next one, conditional home loan forgiveness for Oakleaf Village. Councilor Surratt.
I move to authorize the city manager to execute the necessary documents to convert the payable Oakleaf Village home loan to a 0% interest deferred payment forgivable loan on the condition that the development's current affordability restrictions are maintained through January 1st, 2031.
Second.
Any questions or comments here? All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That passes 6-0. Thank you. And finally, resources for housing affordable to low income persons. Councilor Surratt.
I move to recommend full funding of $550,000 for POKE 2.0, utilizing $550,000 in home funds from the City of Eugene's home allocation. In addition, move to recommend full funding of $1,048,766 for the Coleman, utilizing $580,623 in home funds from the City of Eugene's home fund allocation, and if Springfield agrees pursuant to the Home Consortium's flexibility policy, $468,143 in home funds from the City of Springfield's home allocation.
Second.
Thank you. And that was quite a mouthful. Any questions or comments besides that silly comment? All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. Wait. People, my boxes are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that passes 6-0. Thank you very much. City Attorney, you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry. The motion that was read for action on the home loan forgiveness for Oakleaf, the date that was read was January instead of June.
Oh.
If I could just get we mean June 1 for that motion and a second and a vote on that, then we're good. We don't have to read the whole motion again. But what we're talking about is the conditional home loan forgiveness for the Oakleaf Village. And it would be maintained through June 1, 2031.
I messed up the easiest one.
January 1 seems like the right date, though, doesn't it?
No, I saw the word June. I saw the word June.
And I saw the word June. I didn't hear it either. So there you go.
So the action on the Oakleaf Village home loan to be converted to a forgivable loan as long as it is intended to say, as long as they continue their current affordability restrictions through June 1, 2031.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now we really mean it. That passes.
Sorry. I appreciate it.
You got 3 out of 4, Claire. That's pretty good.
All right. Thank you all very much. Long night, good night, and have a good night. We are adjourned.